I find it interesting this morning to have a gospel that begins one Sabbath day in one of the synagogues. Throughout our Gospels, we have these sort of one-time events. We have lots of them, right? The Christmas birth in Bethlehem. We have the transfiguration up on the mountain, Jesus being baptized, Easter, we have praying in the Garden of Gethsemane, the Last Supper. All of these highlight one-time things. And then today, we have one Sabbath day in one of the synagogues. It's as though Luke is trying to tell us that this is sort of business as usual. This is what Jesus does throughout his time in ministry and his teaching. Jesus enters the synagogue where faithful people gather, and standing there in the midst teaches one day in one of the synagogues. Jesus standing there opening to gathered people a new understanding of God, of speaking of God as though he's on a first-name basis, helping people to understand this overwhelming grace and mercy and love that's so hard for us to grasp. One Sabbath day in one of the synagogues, Jesus saw her. She was perhaps over there at the fringes of the crowd. She was so bent over with the spirit of weakness that she was unable to stand up straight. And I'm convinced that others knew she was there. I'm convinced that probably the synagogue, the gathered people, had come to know her and knew that she just had some limitations being so bent over. They'd learned not to ask her to help with the scrolls, to have that honor. They'd learned that they not to ask her to serve at the potlucks, to stand there because, that would just be too hard for the poor dear to have to stand that long. They would bring her soup. And they take care of her as best they could, but they knew who she was. But part of me also wonders, did they see her? Did they actually see her there? Because that's not always so easy for us, right? This weekend, Amy's out of town, so I took the boys out for dinner, which seemed like the better choice. And so we went to the Culvers here in town, and the boys headed straight for their favorite table, which is in the corner, and it's got the little L-shaped booth so that periodically they could just pile on top of each other because they're boys. And so also sitting next to us at the tables nearby was another group that was having dinner, and they seemed to be from one of our group homes in the area, folks with intellectual disabilities. And so some of them were in those cool motorized wheelchairs. And some of them were wearing helmets, and some of them were making a mess, and some were talking quite loud, and they just were there and having a wonderful time. And I was so proud of my boys. They were curious. They knew they were there, and they looked to see, and then just went on with their supper. And it was really, I was proud of them and then interested to notice that for me, I knew they were there. It was hard not to, but it was also hard to see them, to know how to look at them. You know what I mean? And it's interesting how hard that can be for us to see other people. I used to work with a man who was in a wheelchair. And so I'd take him, we'd go for walks in the community, and I'd notice how people would see him. Or when we were in crowds downtown, people seeing the wheelchair. But I'm not so sure they knew him. They didn't see him. As humans, I don't think we're very good at that. That's hard work. To get past whatever it is that presents itself to us, whether someone is conventionally beautiful or unconventionally unique and interesting, whether their body shape matches to whatever society at this particular time has decided is healthy and the goal, because that changes a lot. Have you noticed? Or if they're modeling something else, whatever, if they have a different ability or present differently, to get beyond whatever that first impression is hard work. And we're not always very good at it. But we see what we think we know of each other. So I'm convinced the folks there in that synagogue knew that woman was there. But I'm also quite certain they did not see her the way Jesus did. Because Jesus doesn't look at us the way we do. Jesus doesn't see us the way others do. And in fact, Jesus doesn't even see us the way we see ourselves. You know that voice that's always going inside? And you know how sometimes it can get pretty snippy and kind of nasty? You know how there are times in life when it's saying things that you would never dare say to another? That's not how Jesus sees us. When Jesus looks at us, he doesn't see fraud or fool or failure or whatever other names and words that internal voice has been saying to you lately. Look at how Jesus sees this dear woman in the synagogue. Jesus sees who we really are and then loves us enough to not leave us there. So Jesus sees this woman. She's over there at the outskirts, and he notices her, and he beckons her forward. Now, to be in the middle of the community probably is not where she's used to, but he beckons her forward, and he watches as she makes her slow, shuffling way into the center of things where he himself is. And maybe for one of the first times in 18 years, Jesus could look her in the eyes. And he says, "Woman, you are set free." And Luke says he reached out and touched her. Maybe he helped straighten her up. And she began praising God. Throughout this month together, we're centering our readings around a phrase that is both our mission and who we are, growing disciples for life. It is our mission because that's what Jesus told us to do. Go to all nations, make disciples. And it's also who we are because we are followers of Jesus. And because Jesus loves us, he's not going to leave us who we are. To follow Jesus changes who we are because we are constantly learning, growing, being loved into something new. And to make disciples is the one reason we are here. We have one product as a community. We have one thing we produce as a community, and that's making disciples. So part of that is us gathered together, right? But it's also us being out in the world to invite others to know this guy, Jesus, that we have fallen so hard for. And so we gather around this phrase, growing disciples for life. And again, we're talking about growing. Last week, Pastor Erica had that wonderful image for us of being rooted in grace and rooted in each other. Sort of that wonderful image of our roots being all tangled up so that we are stronger together. And we had that wonderful picture of a tree planted by water, that lovely biblical imagery, and I loved that, and then I got worried. Because, man, there are some times when I just feel parched. There are some times when my soul feels like a desert. You know what I'm talking about? There are some of those days when I just don't feel like I have water flowing through me, and I just feel dried up and desiccated, and I got worried about what that could mean. But the good news, brothers and sisters, is this. Isaiah saw it. We hear it in the Psalms. We see it at the end of the book, that God is not content to leave deserts barren. But God's purpose is to redeem all of creation. And so in our dried up places, God will bring streams of water. It says the desert will be glad. It will rejoice. At the end of the Bible, it says God's going to bring heaven down to earth and make all things new. God's purpose is not to leave us where we are. But Jesus loves us too much to leave us who we are. Jesus sees us as we are and loves us into something, a whole new thing. By his grace, by his gift, by his love, offered to you here, Jesus can take our dried up places and make them glad, make them rejoice, bring waters in the desert so that our roots can grow deep, and we, as his followers, as his disciples, as the folks who have fallen so hard for him, can have life, abundant life, flourishing life, God's life forever. In just a minute, we're going to sing about this. And I invite you, as we sing, to hear these words as Jesus speaking to you. Do not be afraid, for I am with you. I have called you each by name. Jesus, who sees and knows who we are and is inviting us by his gift and his grace to be transformed, growing disciples for life.